I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
4 more years for Barack Obama as he begins a second term as U.S. president.
When times change, so must we.
And lays out his vision for the next 4 years.
We will respond to the threat of climate change. We will support democracy from Asia to Africa.
What it all means for the U.S. and the world.
There's an element of antagonism that is building between the United States and China.
Plus all the day's other news. A special edition of Biz Asia America begins now. Thanks so much for joining us here in our Washington Broadcast Center. I'm Mike Walter. Welcome to the special edition of Biz Asia America. It has been a long day here in Washington, from military on the streets to marching bands in front of the White House. It was all about the U.S. presidency, and so, in an indirect way, the world. It began just before noon when Barack Obama took a second oath, a public one this time around, to really kick off his second term. He laid out his vision for the years ahead as hundreds of thousands of Americans watched from the National Mall. Just a short time ago, President Obama and the First Lady arrived at the first of the inaugural balls. But beyond the cheering and the ceremonies lie some serious challenges and major divisions in the United States. We begin our coverage with Jessica Stone live overlooking the White House. Jessica, one of the highlights of Obama's inaugural address today was a fitting theme. It was diversity.
Absolutely right, Mike. And of course, this all comes on a day that the U.S. celebrates the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the celebrated American civil rights leader whose nonviolent protests 50 years ago this year made possible a 2-term Obama presidency.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
A ceremonial swearing in for the 44th President of the United States.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Who was mindful of the historic moment.
We, the people, declare today that the most evident of truths, that all of us are created equal, is the star that guides us still.
President Barack Obama made it clear he will use his second term to find a balance between cutting the nation's $16 trillion debt and spending on entitlement programs for the poor and elderly.
Through Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, these things do not sap our initiative, they strengthen us. They do not make us a nation of takers. They free us to take the risks that make this country great.
The top Senate Republican who has supported cuts to entitlement spending responded, calling, quote, the transcendent challenge of unsustainable federal spending and debt, one of the nation's greatest challenges ahead. In contrast to his 2009 inaugural speech, President Obama made combating climate change a priority and said Americans must lead the search for renewable energy.
We cannot cede to other nations the technology that will power new jobs and new industries. We must claim its promise.
He lauded the fulfillment of twin campaign promises, ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and visibly turned American foreign policy eastward.
We will support democracy from Asia to Africa, from the Americas to the Middle East, because our interests and our conscience compel us to act on behalf of those who long for freedom.
I just got back from China, and my concern is that there's an element of antagonism that is building between the United States and China, which could degenerate into a very serious confrontation. I hope that will change.
On the unfulfilled campaign promise of immigration reform, Obama struck a compromising tone, arguing that international students educated in the U.S. should be granted visas to work for American employers. Currently, Chinese students are the largest group studying in the United States. And Mike, despite expectations that the president would use a significant part of his speech to address his new gun control measures, he only made a brief mention, in fact saying that students from Detroit to Newtown, Connecticut should be safe from harm.
Jessica, I noticed the poet today also made a passing reference, some rather eloquent terms about that shooting. But let's talk a little bit more about the diversity out there. What was it like along the parade route?
Well, there were some amazing acts from all over the country and even inspired by Asia. There were some Chinese folk dances. There were some dragon and lion dances. We saw performances from Navajo Indians and from other Native American tribes. And we also saw a performance from the gay and lesbian marching band. That, of course, a big change really in the whole ceremony, as we heard the President of the United States for the first time come out in his inaugural address and support same-sex couples and their marriage rights quite vocally and quite directly. But along the parade route, plenty of diversity today, as we also especially saw a number of high school marching bands and college bands, specifically from some of the historic black colleges in the United States. Absolutely a very special time for them.
Jessica Stone reporting live for us. Thanks so much. Hundreds of thousands of people from all walks of life turned out to cheer, but that was far smaller than the 1.8 million who came here to Washington in 2009. CCTV correspondent Ina Donahue walked with the crowds along the parade route.
Well, we're here right at the back. We're way underneath the Washington Monument. We're very, very far back. We're probably about a mile from the Capitol, but as you can see, there are thousands and thousands of people that have come here. The atmosphere is absolutely electric. We don't have much of a view here, but everyone's watching all the action on huge screens. For many here, the day is particularly meaningful, as the inauguration falls on the same day as the national holiday commemorating Martin Luther King.
It's a very meaningful day. It's a passing of the torch from Dr. King to Obama.
We as a people came a long way, that we can do anything that we want to, and we can be successful at anything.
So what do you tell your children about the president?
I tell them one day they can be the president. Anything is possible right now.
Well, right now everyone's listening to Obama's inaugural speech. The crowd is extremely quiet. Everyone's very calm, and everyone's absolutely riveted by this screen right behind me. Some were hoping for Obama to do a great deal more. Michael is a student who will be graduating when Obama ends his second term.
I want the job market to be a lot better.
Others want Obama to continue what he's already started.
I'd like to see him do something about gun control. I'd like to see him wind down the Afghan war. I'd like to see him shore up the finances to a degree without cutting too much.
And for Jasmine, who traveled from New Jersey,
education. Education is most important.
We've had Obama's inaugural speech, we've had the national anthem sung by Beyonce, and now we're heading up to Pennsylvania Avenue along with thousands of people. It feels like the whole city is walking along with us, but things are still very calm. We're going up to the parade route where President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama will come out of the Capitol, and they'll part drive, part walk all the way down Pennsylvania Avenue back to the White House. So we finally made it down to Pennsylvania Avenue. The sun's come out, it's turned into a glorious day. As you can see, everyone's taking every available vantage point. This is a ticketed area, but right over here we have the old Washington Post Office, and you can see people right up the steps there. They probably got here really early this morning. We're probably about 5 minutes away from the actual parade now. Every spectator we spoke to came from a different state. These ladies from Atlanta, South Carolina and Florida want Obama to do more across the political and geographical divides.
I hope that we can somehow unite this country. We're too divided. We're much too divided here.
A long day for many, and a spectacle largely seen via phones and iPads. But from a crowd's eye view, we still saw history pass by. Nina Donahue, CCTV, Washington.
One of the biggest differences between this term and the last are the people making decisions here in Washington, the president's cabinet. Sean Calebs is here now for a look at who's staying and who's going and how this impacts international policy. Sean.
Exactly, Mike, an important day. The president relies heavily on his cabinet for advice and counsel on foreign affairs, defense, economics, and so on. Now, in other countries, these positions may be called ministers, but in the U.S., cabinet-level secretaries date back to the beginning of the presidency. Over the years, a number of offices have been elevated to cabinet rank, such as Chief of Staff, Head of the Environmental Protection Agency, and Ambassador to the United Nations. Now, one of the highest profile positions is held by Hillary Clinton, the powerful Secretary of State. She's done a great deal of globetrotting over the past 4 years, and now for the first time in 34 years, she is leaving the public eye. But for how long? there are calls for her to run for president in 2016. First, however, she has some important last-minute work. She will appear before Congress twice in the coming week, once to testify on Benghazi, the attack in Libya that claimed the life of U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens. And secondly, to introduce the man President Obama wants to succeed her, John Kerry. He's currently a Democratic senator from Massachusetts and ran a failed bid to become president in 2004. Now, Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta has served in that role since 2011. Last week was supposed to be an easy trip for him, to go to Europe and say goodbye to close allies and friends. But the hostage crisis at a natural gas site in Algeria literally blew up. Panetta focused all his attention on that, and he's vowing to track down terrorists, turning to a lawless stretch of the Sahara Desert to set up operations. In reality, it will be the new defense secretary charged with that role now. President Obama is nominating Chuck Hagel, a former Republican senator from Nebraska. Hagel is a decorated Vietnam War veteran and would be the first Vietnam vet and enlisted soldier to run the Pentagon. Now, as the United States continues to try and claw its way out of a prolonged economic slump, the president will be turning to his Secretary of Treasury. Timothy Geithner has held that job for the past 4 years. He came in an effort to steer the U.S. out of a recession, but it is a problem critics say he helped create. Geithner is the former head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and he's blamed for missing clear signs the banking industry was headed for a crisis back in 2007. Now, while Secretary Geithner crafted the bank bailout plan, a widely unpopular effort, but it is credited with stemming the panic of the U.S. economic collapse. The president wants his current chief of staff, Jack Lew, to replace Geithner. Lew, however, comes with baggage of his own. He was chief operating officer of Citigroup when that organization received millions of dollars in a government bailout. Now, many were appalled that Lew received a $900,000 bonus the same year the government had to prop up the institution. There will be a certain sense of continuity as President Obama begins his second term. A number of cabinet members will remain. Now, they include the Attorney General, Agriculture Secretary, the head of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Education, and the Secretary of Homeland Security. Mike?
All right, Sean Calebs, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Now that we have a good sense of the cabinet, we want to get some insight into how things might be different over the next 4 years. For clues, we take a closer look at President Obama's speech. I spoke about it with Kyle Kondik, who analyzes American politics at the University of Virginia Center for Politics. He is also a contributor to the center's new book on the 2012 election titled Barack Obama and the New America. I asked him what we learned today.
It was a striking lack of foreign policy talk, I think, in general in this speech today. And he doesn't, maybe he has been kind of hardened to the world as it is, as opposed to maybe the world that he would like it to be. Not just in maybe dealing with countries abroad, but also here at home. There wasn't really the sort of conciliatory tone with his own political opponents here, where there was that 4 years ago. And I think that it was kind of more of a statement of principles as to what he wanted out of government. And then there was a little bit of foreign policy in it, but not a lot.
You mentioned not a lot. The one that caught my ear, we will support democracy from Asia to Africa, from the Americas to the Middle East. That was just about it. I mean,
Right.
He didn't really say much more than that. What do we take away from that if you're watching from afar?
Well, look, I mean, we just had a presidential campaign in 2012 that was shockingly devoid of foreign policy content. The candidates were running on the economy. Even during the foreign policy debate, there wasn't much talk of foreign policy. A lot of the candidates tried to move it back to the economy. So Americans right now are very interested in what's going on in our own neck of the woods, in the economy, and that's, I think, was reflected in the inaugural address today, in that it was a speech about what's going on here in America, and not necessarily what's going on abroad. And I think that's what the American people are looking for, rightly or wrongly.
4 years ago, there was all this hope, change. It just seemed like there was so much promise. 4 years later, the audience not nearly as big as 4 years ago, and perhaps the expectations not as big as well. What about the president himself? Does this seem like he's going to be much more forceful? He doesn't have to run for re-election. Is he really going to try and drive home his point? How do you see him as a changed president in his second term?
Well, I think he's sort of wised up to how things are going in Washington, and that is that not everybody's going to be behind him in the things that he seeks, particularly on kind of thorny public policy issues like immigration, which he addressed today in the speech, and especially climate change, which he brought up and was forceful about. But a lot of Republicans don't even believe that that's a problem or that people have any we have any effect on that. And I think he's trying to appeal to the American people to say, this is important to me, it should be important to you too, and you should tell your legislator that that's important, that that's an important topic. But he's not he can't just, bend the Republicans to his will, but he also needs to get out there and talk about the things that he believes in, and that's what he did today, I think.
What about his second term? What are we likely to see?
Well, I think it's hard to see a lot of big substantive action on the things that he wants to accomplish, including climate change and also on his recently proposed package of gun control measures, because he has a hostile House, controlled by the Republicans, and the Republicans have very different ideas about how to tackle these problems or to not even tackle them at all. And so, anything that happens substantively, he's going to have to get through the House, and I don't know if the House is going to want to play ball on some of these things. And so, the president came out there and talked about what he wants to do and what his beliefs are, but those ideas and beliefs are very different than what the Republicans in the House are willing to give him.
Thanks so much for coming in and offering your insights.
No problem. Thank you.
Just ahead, we go in depth with the people who voted for Barack Obama, but first, a look at how the Chinese and American cultures were bridged during the inaugural parade with a dragon performance.
traditions with the community.